Thank you, everybody, who brought all this delicious food. It was so good not to have to cook tonight.
If you want to help yourself to coffee or some more dessert, feel free to get up. If these table furniture, some of you just want to use the table here, but if you want to bring your chairs up closer, that would be fine. Because I think the tables will be a little difficult to move, but if you can't hear something, bring your chairs up here. We're honored tonight to have, actually, among our members, the speakers, the 5 speakers who are going to speak tonight about their family history, and these are families that have been a very much part of our development and our growth in Crete from the beginnings. And so we're privileged to have, I'll introduce them all at once and then introduce one at a time. Carol Treble will be speaking about the Treble family, Winston Demuth about the Hughes family, Jim Adams about the Adams family, and Jackie Gaines and Leo Ray Liebernick about the Gaines family. So first I would like to introduce Leo Ray and Jackie, who even have some visual displays up here to help tell the story about their family, the Gaines family in Crete. We're hoping that everyone will take about 15 minutes, between 10 and 15 minutes, and then at the end, if you have any questions or want to add in about the families, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Jackie, and you all know my sister, Marie. First of all, I want to mention my great-great-grandmother, Catherine Adams. Now, her grandfather, Asa, fought in the Revolutionary War, and she also had 3 sons who fought in the Civil War. Now, in the spring of 1836, Catherine's father, Henry Adams, came in a covered wagon from Vermont. He gathered all his earthly possessions together and took this wagon and 2 oxen and went through swamps, mountains, forests, and even Indians, and crossed the western border of Indiana and settled in a village which was later called Crete. Now he settled 1 mile west near of the Big Timber, and he erected a log cabin. He stayed that winter. The next spring he went back to Vermont using the same wagon, different oxen, and picked up his family. He came back with the same wagon, different oxen. The wagon we still have. It's on Fairview Farm behind my brother Bob Gaines' house.
That wagon was handmade of hickory wood, and the axles were also wood, and it had a strip of iron on the bottom to prevent wear.
As a little girl, I can remember hearing the clippity-clop of the horses coming down the street, and I could hear the wagon, and my grandfather would always stop and pick me up, and it seemed like he was always going to the lumber yard in Crete, but it was the same wagon. Now, John Adams, the 2nd president of the United States, was a cousin to Catherine. Now, Horace and Catherine Adams were of the old Puritan type. They were few of words, but deep in meaning, and I was always told how my great-grandfather would sit on an old rocking chair on a porch with a large Bible opened on his lap, and he would read from this Bible. They had 8 children that they reared to adulthood, and none of them were ever struck. They were taught to respect the parent, not the rod. 3 of their sons served in the Civil War. Edwin starved to death in Andersonville, and all 3 of them are buried at the Adams Cemetery. Now, my sister Leah Ray, about a year ago, was cleaning an old cupboard in the farmhouse. She saw this little wooden box in the back of the cupboard, and she opened it, and it was full of Civil War letters. Martha, the daughter of Horace and Catherine, married Horatio Gaines, about 1870. They had 2 sons, Ferris, my grandfather, and Walter. Now, Horatio was known for raising thoroughbred driving team horses on the old family homestead.
And that's down where the chiropractic offices are. It was known as the Blue Parrot Tea Room, and it has the big white pillars yet.
A story we've always been told was that Horatio and Martha were awakened by the whinnying of the horses in the wee hours of the morning. Horatio took a lantern, he went down to the barn, and when he entered the barn, he was killed by horse thieves. And yes, they got away with the horses. Now, my grandfather was a young boy, and this is his picture, and that's just about the age he was when his father was killed by horse thieves. And it was his duty to take over as head of the household. And his dream was always to be a lawyer, but he had to give it up because he had to educate his younger brother. His younger brother attended the University of Illinois, and he later became a professor at the University of Illinois. Ferris's mother, Martha, always used to tell the story of when she was a little girl, how the Indians would come peek in the windows at night, and she would be very frightened, and Mama and Papa would have to close the shutters. And one other Indian story we've always been told is my grandfather, when he was a boy, he and his friend dressed up like wild Indians, even applying war paint all over their body. They rode horses bareback through the town of Crete, giving loud war whoops. And I guess they frightened many people in Crete, and supposedly it was in the Crete record that wild Indians had ridden through town. Now, in 1901, Ferris married Lily Cook. She was a school teacher and would ride horseback to school. While Fairview Farm was purchased in 1877, the farm home was built in 1903 by Ferris and Lily. They had 4 children, Edwin, Charles, my father, Hazel, and Gladys. In the farm home, there have been 4 births, 3 weddings, and 7 funerals. There have been many happy times in the home, and also tragedies. Ferris's father met a violent death by the horse thieves, and so did his mother. Years later, she was killed crossing the highway going to the Methodist church. She was hit by a car. While eating dinner one day in the farmhouse, my grandparents saw 2 boys running from the barn, and later they saw smoke coming from the barn. The barn burnt for a week. The fire department could do nothing to save it, but they continually sprayed the farmhouse, and they saved the farmhouse.
And the first barn was built of tongue and groove.
Yeah, we were always told it was a beautiful barn. It was tongue and groove. And my Uncle Ed, he went in to save the horses, and he did get a couple of them out, blindfolded them, and took them all the way to First Street, but the minute he let go of them, they went back and ran into the barn. And I guess many of the animals did die. 5 generations have enjoyed the home and the farm and the land, and our wish is to preserve it. The staircase in the farmhouse and all the woodwork in the hallway and the dining room is all solid cherry. Ferris and Lily were going for a buggy ride while they were engaged, and it was after a storm, and they saw these cherry trees blown over. My grandfather went back and got a buckboard, and he went and he picked up all those cherry trees. And that's what the staircase and all the woodwork is.
And it's in its original condition.
Right. I just want to say a few words about some of these pieces. This box, they came on the covered wagon in 1836. They packed their belongings in it. As I said, that's a picture of my grandfather Ferris. This is a crazy quilt done by Catherine, and this is hand woven by Martha Adams. This butter churn, Lily, our grandmother, churned butter in. And then the little foot warmer is the type that Catherine Adams used. They would take hot coals from the fire, put them in the ash pan, carry it out to their horse and buggy, put it on the floor, and their long pull skirts went over the foot warmer, and the heat would go up to keep the ladies warm. Then when they got to church, they would carry them into church and put their little feet on them to keep their feet warm because the churches were not heated. Also at the farmhouse, we have several books from the late 1800s. They seem to be assessor books. And when the time's right, you know, we have a lot of books that we do want to give to the Historical Society on early Crete. If you have any questions, let us know. This is our family tree, and it shows in here John Adams and John Quincy Adams. And if you want to look at it, you're welcome to. Oh, Richard, yeah, Rich has a story about this same covered wagon. I guess my grandfather took it to a parade, and Richard was a Boy Scout.
My wife was mentioning something about the wagon. When I was a Boy Scout, I think we had a camporee or jamboree or something over at the Moline Fairgrounds. And one of the Silcoxes made the hoops. We put canvas back on it so it was like a covered, it was a covered wagon. And it took forever to get to Monique with a couple of horses. And then tragedy struck. I think I was probably about 12 years old. I think I was just in Scouts. And the horses were frightened while Ferris was standing up in the front of them. And they took off, trampled him. I don't know if the horses trampled him. At least the wagon got him pretty good, I know. He ended up, if I remember right, with broken ribs and punctured lung. And I can remember running to, I think there were some senior scouts from Chicago Heights that had a troop there. And they had a first aid station set up. And I came running up to them and I said, you know, a man's been run over by the horses and that, and they grabbed their little kits and took off running. And when they got there, the one guy knelt down and he started working, and all of a sudden he just kind of backed up and he said, this guy's really hurt. He thought it was just a simulation for them to practice on, I guess. Ib Fink was probably there when this was all going on. But it was the same wagon, I guess, that was used throughout the family.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Very good.
Next we have the Treble family.
We were the last comers to the stage, let the others go first.
Do you want the others?
Yes.
All right, all right, all right. Winston Demuth, we'll talk about the Hughes family. He also, boy, you all seem to have these long scrolls of family history here, but Winston, you want to come up and talk a little bit about the Hughes family?
Well, I made it easy for myself. I wrote a papers back in 1947. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'm going to extract parts of it. As far as we know, the Hughes family began in this country, in Salisbury, Massachusetts, talking in the period of 1672, 1678, 1680. Who the first one that we know of was George Hughes. Who his people were, we know not. His son, I'm going to go right through and bring it up to today. Solomon Hughes was the son of George. He lived in Boston. He was born in Salisbury, Massachusetts, lived in Boston, lived in Rentham, Massachusetts, lived in Ipswich and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we talk about moving around the countryside. They did too. But like him, it took a long time to get there. One thing that is tied in with Solomon that is rather interesting, and from a historical standpoint at least, his wife's name was Martha Caleb, and her father wrote a book. Her father was Robert Caleb, and her father wrote a book in 1700 refuting Cotton Mather's attempt to start the second round of witchcraft trials. Now, that sounds real far out to us today, but witchcraft was believed in very deeply by many people. But there are also a great many people that did not believe in witchcraft. And this man, Caliph, was one of them. But when he wrote this book and tried to have it published in this country, he could not get it published here because there was too much enthusiasm for Cotton Mather. So he had it published in England and brought back to this country. And one of Cotton Mather's relatives, Increase Mather, at that time was president of Harvard University. And you can appreciate, if I can use that word, he had the book burned in the yard of Harvard University because he believed with what his cousin believed. The next man, the son of Solomon, was a Benjamin. And he lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Foxborough, Massachusetts, and Attleboro, Massachusetts. He had 5 children by his first wife, and he had 6 children by his second wife. His second child by the second wife was William Hughes, and he was the first generation that migrated to this area, although he did not come first. His son, Lumen, came first with a whole passel of kids. And he had 12 kids altogether. One of them stayed there. 2 of them were subsequently born in this area. They came from far up in Vermont, in the northern part of Vermont, Milton, Vermont, a little tiny town. I don't know exactly how they did get here. I have read that they came by canal boat to the, what would be, Lake, not Erie, the one beyond Ontario, and then took ship from there to Michigan somewhere. Detroit probably, but I do not know that. Then from there, they came from that area by wagon to Blue Island first. And they stayed over in the winter in Blue Island, the summer and the winter, and then in the spring following, they came out to Crete. And they all settled down where the present Balmoral racetrack is now. What used to be the center field, and is now partially covered over, was the family burial ground. So there are burials from this Hughes family in that center field that has been now covered by the shortened trotter track. Covered it over. The family home, original family home, stood about where the clubhouse is now. With all these kids that they had, that Lumen had, I should say, they all took up pieces of land adjacent to each other. And there were about 2,000 acres that belonged to these sons of this Hughes family. And it was, subsequently, the area was called Hughesburg as a result of that. Going back to William, the father of old Lumen, was in the Revolutionary War. He went from a small town in New Hampshire, Richmond, New Hampshire, I believe it was. He was only 16 years old. And I assume that what he did, either he was either very anxious to get into the army, or else he sold or was paid money to take someone else's place. Because at that time when they drafted someone, the central government, whatever it may have been, whether it was state or colony or whatever, would stipulate to a town, you have so many people as a population base, and we require from you so many men to serve in the army, and we require from you so many bushels of corn, and so many heads of beef, and so many hogs. No names were given. Therefore, if a person who was well-to-do or had a little bit of money did not want to go, he could very well pay someone else to take his place. And I'm guessing that what happened was this 16-year-old boy figured this is a good way to get a few shillings, and probably signed up. He subsequently was at Orange Town, which is now Orange, New Jersey. At the time, Major Andre was hung. Does anyone recall Major Andre, or should I explain that? He was the major who was colluding with Benedict Arnold. He was a British major. And he got caught by a couple of sentries on the colonial side. He had some orders in his boots, and when they found these orders in his boots, they took him as a prisoner and subsequently hung him at Orange, New Jersey. This man was there. At this time, Benedict Arnold was knocking holes in the walls at West Point, the fort, so that when the British came up the Hudson River, they could walk right through the wall. Well, of course, by Major Andre being caught, that little plan was scotched. And subsequently, William Hughes was sent up to West Point to help repair the breaches in the walls. He was in for 6 months, and this was a normal term, 6 months at a time, because these men still had to go home and help with the crops. The women and children couldn't do it all. So they'd go and sign up for 6 months, and they'd go home for maybe a month or two, and then maybe they'd go back and sign up again, and go back to whatever duty that was necessary. So if when we read American history, we read how difficult it was for the Continental Army, this was one of the reasons that it was so difficult, besides the lack of money and the lack of people. But these men had to maintain homes too while they still had to do the fighting. Subsequently, William came out to this part of the country in his 80s, where his son Luman was already living, and died here and is buried in the Crete Cemetery. One of 4 Revolutionary soldiers buried in Will County. Not too many of them were buried in the Midwest at all because they were too old. He was born in 1761, so he was only 16 years old when he went into the Continental Army. And at the time he came here, approximately 1845 or 1847, you can see he's a pretty old man by this time. I'm amazed that he made the trip, and I don't know how he did it. I don't think he came by horse and wagon. By that time, well, he may have, 1845, 47. I don't think we had any railroads here, I don't recall. But it's still amazing that the man made it here. Skipping back to Luman Hughes, who had a whole, as I said before, a whole passel of kids. I'm going to read you the list. Joseph, who stayed in the East. William Woodcock came to Crete, and he did some clerical work and acted as a lawyer, but he never studied law. A son by the name of Luman, so there are 2 Lumans. He moved to the northeast of Chicago Heights and had a farm there. A little story about him that you will find in the records at the Presbyterian Church. He was a member, but he didn't go sometimes. So the Presbyterian Church sent out the clerk of the session to talk to Luman and said, Luman, how come you haven't been in church? Now this, remember, we have a choice of going to church. They had a choice too, but if they didn't go, they paid a price. Because their whole economic system at this time, in that particular area, was pretty much based around the people that lived there, and they were mostly all Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, and very devout people. And you went to church, or else you had a problem. And your problem could extend to the economic side of life, because you had to deal with these people economically. Anyway, Luman said, I'll be there. And Luman didn't turn up, so they sent the clerk out again. Luman said, I'll be there. And he did go this time. Then he slacked off again. And they came after Luman and said, Luman, you haven't been coming to church. Oh, Luman got a little perturbed, and he decided he came up to Crete to the Methodist church where all the rest of his relatives were. But it's interesting to go back through these old records and read some of these things. We can laugh at them today, but it's very, very serious business at that time. Next one, Austin Ellis. Incidentally, these children were all born in Milton, Vermont. Joseph in 1820, William Woodcock 1819, Luman in 1823, Austin Ellis in 1825, Benjamin Franklin in anybody here know, his name escapes me. He's buried here. Austin Ellis is buried here. Luman's buried here. William Woodcock's buried here. Daniel, born in Milton, Vermont, is buried here, married to Fidelia L. Wood, daughter of Willard Wood. Nelson Wallace, born in Milton, Vermont, didn't live here in his later years. He went into Chicago. Lucy Celestia was born in Blue Island in 1836 and lived in this area later on. And Emily Sally, the last child of the 13, was born here in Crete and then subsequently died in Manteno. When Luman and Lucy and the 9 children traveled from Milton, Vermont via the Erie Canal, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie to a point near Detroit, then by wagon to Blue Island, and then moved to Hughesburg, I try to recount in my own mind and to picture in my mind how these people made it. Can you imagine living in a log cabin in this kind of climate in the wintertime. I have a hard enough time living in a house that's heated with gas, let alone living in a log cabin where we burn wood. So I oftentimes wonder how they made it, and I count myself very lucky that I'm here today. Somebody had to be very strong to pass on the line so that we could be here today. I could go on for a number of minutes with this, but anyway, Austin Ellis had a son, Rollin Austin, who was my grandfather. Born here in 1859, married a lady here from this town, Harriet Esther Hood. His father had gone to California during the gold rush and found enough gold to pay for his farm, which I think, from what I can gather, was rather lucky, unusual. Not many people found a great deal of gold. The time these people got there, which was in 1850, I imagine most of the good claims had been staked out and pretty much the easy pickings were done and gone. It took them 4 months to get out to California from Crete by wagon. And I imagine these men walked most of the way. I don't know how long he was there, but having found the gold, he had a little money in his pocket, so that when they came home, Jimmy Adams' great-grandfather was in this same group. But when he came home, they went down to the Isthmus of Panama, walked across the isthmus, and took a ship up to our country. Now, I've heard two stories. One they went to New York, one they went to Philadelphia. I don't know. I wish I could find out. I had a time machine, maybe I'd go backwards. My mother was subsequently born in this town. Her sisters, her brother, Bill Hughes, was her brother. Winnie Hughes McCoy was a sister. Ethel Hughes Trowbridge was a sister. Harriet Hughes was a sister. And since that time, these people have left some of their progeny here, me among them. I have several things here that I'm going to leave out. Pictures that you may enjoy. These are pictures in the front of the book of Lumen and his wife, Lucy Elwell, and then their children after that. They're all labeled on the back side, so you can see them. But you might get a real kick out of looking at these old pictures. There is one here that's rather unusual. It's not in the Hughes family. The picture was taken, I believe, in 1846 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Very unusual that we would have one at that age, because photography didn't come to this country until about, I would say, around 1835, 1836. Nipsey in France made the first successful photograph in 1825. And then it traveled from Europe to our east coast, and then it traveled inland over a period of time. These little ateliers were set up, these little photographic shops were set up in one town after another. A man would go in and be in a town for a while and take pictures of everybody that wanted a picture, and then perhaps he'd move on to somebody else that perhaps come in later on. But they made a living by this. One thing I brought I'd like to read a little bit about. This happens to be a descendant of somebody else that I'm descended from back in England, but it recounts some of his trip going out to California. If I can find where it is. Yeah, here it is. In 1850, with 3 other young men, he set out with a wagon and 6 horses to cross the continent and to dig gold in California. Floundering through the black prairie mud of Missouri for 4 weeks, they reached the city of St. Joseph on the Missouri River on May 10th. They crossed to the west bank on a mud scow rowed by oars, landing in a camp of Pygmy Indians. The next day, they joined an endless caravan of white-topped wagons, horses, mules, and oxen, and launched out on a lonely waste of 2,000 miles inhabited only by savage Indians. Following the turbid Nebraska and bright sweet water rivers, they crossed the roof of the continent, the Rocky Mountains, by the South Pass at an altitude of 7,490 feet, whence they plunged into the silent expanse of waterless yellow deserts that lie between that chain and the snow mountains of California. On July 27th at the Humboldt River, 600 miles from Sutter's Fort near Sacramento, their provisions nearly exhausted and their animals unable from starvation to haul their wagon, they cut out its spokes and sides to make pack saddles. Then, abandoning everything except their arms, a little food, and their blankets, they took their way down the Humboldt River, a hideous desert, which for 300 miles was strewed with dead and dying animals. The river was polluted, alkali water, unfit for man or beast. 4 of their horses died, and the party scattered. During the night of August 11th and 12th, Elisha led his staggering forces through scenes of death and desolation over the arid sands of the 40-mile Humboldt Desert to the ice-fed waters of the Carson River. Following that stream southward for 80 miles, he entered the Carson Canyon on August 25th, a cliff in the granite wall opening into the snow mountains beyond which lay the gold of California. On August 26th, he crossed the territorial line of California 2 weeks prior to its admission as a state into the federal union. Abandoning here on a grassy meadow his helpless animals and shouldering a 30-pound pack of logbooks, biscuit, and bacon, he slowly approached the granite ledges and snowfields of the Californian chain, which 3 days later he surmounted and crossed at 9,338 feet, and at once began the rough descent to the Pacific Ocean. At dark on August 31st, 1850, no roof at hand, he made his leafy couch under a low-branching tree, sleeping soundly until the frost at dawn awakened him. Before him was his last day's journey. Sutter's Fort was 40 miles distant. At sunrise, by a brook, he breakfasted on 2 ship's crackers and ice-cold water. At sunset, half-starved but in robust health, in tatters and wholly penniless but in high spirits, he entered the mushroom city of cloth and clapper, Sacramento, thus happily ending his pilgrimage of 142 days from Paris, Illinois. Count yourself lucky you are alive and are here after the way these people lived. I don't know how they did it, but I'm glad they did. I'm going to leave this book up here for anyone to look at that wishes, and also recently we had a Hughes family reunion, and Audrey and I put out a little booklet that we handed out to people that has the genealogy in the back, and it has some history in the front. Letters from this, the first reunion was in 1923, and we picked up on that and started with the a copy of the engraved invitation that was sent out to people at that time. And then a poem that was composed by my grandfather regarding the people of his clan. And then newspaper recount of that reunion. Hughes family history. I can take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Winston. Actually, since you and Audrey were the publishers of this, do you have an extra one for the Historical
I
Society?
can keep that one.
That'd be great. Nothing like asking for donations. Anywhere we can get them there. Some of these people, as they tell stories, they have some common ancestry. And I believe Jimmy Adams, you have some common ancestry, right, with Winston and his...
No, with all the Gaineses.
Oh, with Gaineses, so, okay. But next tonight, we're going to be enjoy hearing what you have to say about the Adams family. The Adams family goes back quite a bit in Crete, and so you're on next.
I left my notes at home, so.
You don't need notes, Jimmy.
I should have given you this thing on the California trip, Jim.
Yeah. Of course, I come from the Adams family. The Adams, our genealogy goes back to the year of 800. And it goes all the way up to Charlemagne and about 17 counts of Flanders until it comes some way or another they got across the English Straits and ended up in Scotland. And it says in our book somewhere that Adams came out of the Moors to start the Adams family. And at that time, somewhere along there for a period of about maybe 200 years,
App changed to Lord App, who was one of the kings of England before the 7 kings got together and made the one king for the whole country. There was a king for each section of the land. And Lord Adam, they, somewhere in there, they, the name was called Fitz Adam. Well, they dropped the Fitz and put the S on the end, and that's where the Adams family started. But all the first 600 or 700 years, we were all had royal blood, and of course it's a big mixture now. But back in those days, I remember when I was a child, we used to get Christmas cards from the King of England every Christmas, because we at that time they considered us still royal people, I guess. And that stopped around 1930. In 1635, Henry of Baintree, Henry Adams, came from England, and he landed in Baintree, Massachusetts, and that's where all of our family's trees starts in this country. There is one of the big branches, the Gaineses is one of the big branches that goes out, and there was 2 or 3 of the more or less Adamses that went out the other way, except there was a Dodge family in there also. And all of these people came to Crete. Well, the first one came in 1835 that we have in our records. That's on our, I don't know, is this mine?
No, yours is in that box, Jim.
This box. Yeah, let me hold it. I want to show you what Winston did a lot of work on it.
I got the original one from Adams, the blueprint. I tried to have it reproduced so I could give copies to Jim and some of the other people, but a blue blueprint would not reproduce. So I laid this out on my drafting table in the basement, and I redid the thing.
Just hold it about like that, man. This is Henry of Baintree, Baintree, Massachusetts. And he came and it's split up. There was Joseph Adams and one of his sons, John Adams, and down here was Ensign Edward Adams, and that's the line I come from. They come from John, up here. That's the Gaines family over in here. And this is the Dodge family, right in here. By the way, the Dodges, the way I understand it, some of the people that came, some of the Dodges that came from Massachusetts and Vermont stopped at Crete, and the others went on to Dodge City in the Dakotas, or wherever it's at. Going down through all of these people, about 4 generations, we come to a family here that there's 14 children. And the fourth child, or the third child, was my great-grandfather, William C. Adams. William C. Adams come to Crete, and he was a wagon maker. They made wagons for all these people, the farmers and so forth. That was his means of livelihood. In 1850, after the gold was, they had the big gold rush, while he was talking about his uncle, great-grandfather, and my great-grandfather, and 4 other people left Crete, and they went to California to make their fortune. I never did hear about our family getting into this fortune.
Wouldn't make any difference because by this time they'll all be spent in.
Anyway, William C. Adams, my great-grandfather, went to California by wagon. I think it took somewhere like 4 to 5 months.
4 months it took.
4 months to get out there. And they split up. They were all going in a certain area around San Diego, in the
Sacramento.
Yeah, Sacramento. In the Feather River area, and there was Suiters, where they had the big placer operations, where that's where all the gold was. And evidently my great-grandfather must have got a few dollars because he went to San Francisco, got on a boat, went down to the Isthmus of Panama, and there was no canal there at that time, so they had to walk this 88 miles, I guess it is, across the isthmus. And then they take a boat from there and go up to either New York City or St. Louis or someplace. Not St. Louis, but Philadelphia. believe this or not, but when my great-grandfather was walking across the Isthmus of Panama, he picked up this bottle, and I didn't know we even had it in our house until after my mother had died, and we were going through some of the things. My grandfather brought that home, great-grandfather brought it home, and it was a prized little thing there, because it says on here, this Scottish beer bottle was picked up on the old foot trail across the Isthmus of Panama. This trail was used by gold miners returning from California during the gold rush of 1849. And this grandfather, William Adams, gave to my father in the volunteer was made by Kennedy Barrowfield Potteries, Glasgow, Scotland. That's the Kennedy family that became president of the United States. It was their company. Yep. He got to Crete. He got back to Crete again. Most of you people know where Harry Roush lives. Well, my great-grandfather built that house in 1851 or 52. It's right around in there. And he raised a family of 5 girls and 3 boys. My Aunt Belle was the oldest one of the children. She married a Frank D. Jarnett, who's related to us. We have one buried over in the Crete Cemetery. And they were in the newspaper business in Crete years ago, along with the Trowbridges and Tillotsons. I think they were all in the paper at one time or another. William Adams bought evidently around 400 acres of land. And it started out on 5th Street, and on the east side of Dixie Highway, it went to Richton Road, and went on all the way over to the other side of the Lincolnshire Country Club. And then he sold it to Myron and to David Adams. They split this up. And there's a Hayner subdivision where the library is going to be built. And there was, what was her name? I think it was Aisha. You don't know? That's why I should have had my notes with me, obviously. And Myron was the agent for Fairbanks Morse in Crete. He bought the old hotel building and had a big machine shop in the basement of it. And never did finish all the other rooms upstairs, but he had about 4 apartments he rented out. And that's a big building because I helped him paint it one summer. Big building. Anyway, being by the railroad track and watching the section guys, we went by with their Irish mails, how they jump up and down like that. He says, there's an easier way to do that. So he designed a gasoline engine and put a gasoline engine on one of these called the section hand, or section car they call it. And he tried to sell them to a couple of railroads, and nobody wanted to buy it. So he made a trip over to England, and he told them over there that they were buying them like hotcakes to them. Come back to the United States, and he started, man, they couldn't keep up with the market. That's how good it was. And it developed into where the Adams Machine Shop in Chicago was the largest machine shop in the whole country until about the start of World War II. And then there was naturally some big conglomerates that came in. But that was one of the things that Myron did. That I remember Myron because I did a lot of work for him. And I think my mechanical ability got partially from him. That's why I was telling this little gizmo here is a little thrashing machine with a Fordson tractor on it. When I was a kid and I never had any toys, I made my own. And I made that when I was 9 years old. It's been sitting in a box at home for 50, 60 years.
That must be in the library at first, this place.
sometimes I give it to the Historical Society. Getting back to our family now, in our family we had 4 boys and 2 girls. And the one girl, Marion, and my brother Marvin were twins. Marion was killed in an unfortunate kidding around with some kids one night. She got killed in an automobile mishap. Marvin went to college for a couple, 2 or 3 years. He joined the Air Force. He came out the #1 man in his class, and he worked his way up to where he spent 32 years in the service, and he got the Legion of Merit 2 times, which is the highest medal that you can get in the country during peacetime. He was with General LeMay's Strategic Air Command, and we didn't know until an article came out in the U.S. This Week magazine. A 7-page article came out about what he was doing for the last 30 years, and his wife didn't even know because everything was very, very top secret. He was flying the same kind of planes that the U-2 pilot, that the Powers, he shot down and captured. He had a very illustrious career. My brother Ralph joined the Navy and got into the submarine service. He served 32 years on submarine. On a certain day in 1944, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, an airplane was shot down, and Ralph was on this sea rescue detail, and went over. This man that was still in this life raft. And, Ralph got a hold of him and a couple other guys back on board the submarine. We found out 25 years later that it was President Bush. And when Ralph's obituary came out, it was in almost every newspaper in the United States. We got a whole flock of them. It was quite an honor to have him be honored, that person. Harold, my brother Harold, he was with the 15th Air Force. He was shot down over Yugoslavia. He was missing in action for almost 2 years. We didn't know whether he was living or dead or what happened, but we came out to the good because he was captured when his airplane blew all apart. He was found unconscious on the ground, and Marshal Tito had some evacuation hospitals in that area, and they got a hold of him, and they had a woman doctor there that broke and reset his leg every day for about 6 weeks to keep it from healing. They found out that she was a German sympathizer, and so they shot her. That's how they got rid of her. But Harold came back, and he was on a disability pension, and he got a job through he was still a commissioned officer in the Air Force, but he became the #1 top adjudicator for the Chicago area. And that person has a final say of what your pension's going to be. Is it going to be 10%, 15, or 30, or 40? He had a very, very good job with that. BA, weapons administration. There were 4 boys from our family that went in the service, and all 4 of us came out with a pension. And that means that you had to have at least 20 years service. And I was about second, I think I was the second one that went in, but I was the last one to get out. I had 37 years in when I retired from the Navy Reserve. I was an instructor at Great Lakes for about, maybe 25 or 26 years. I spent 2 weekends a month going up there to teach my classes that I had up there. Really enjoyed it. And every year I'd go on a 2-week cruise somewhere, and I went all over the place. And during the war, actual war, I was in the Coast Guard, and I was stationed on the Pier Marquette car ferries. We used them as training ships, and I was an instructor on there. And you can believe this or not, but in a period of 14 months, I went across Lake Michigan so many times. When you add it all up, I went around the world at least Then they branched me out and I went up to this Lake Superior. I was in the Department of the Treasury at that time, and I was in charge of a I forget what the word is now. I got that sometimes disease, you know. Sometimes you remember it, sometimes you don't.
And I joined your club.
I have a picture here. This is my pride and joy. This picture was taken, I think, about 1923 or 24. It was taken at Dasher's Park. Yeah. This is a picture of the Adams family and the Allens family. We were very close back in those days. And all of us went in the service. And all of us came back home, thank the Lord. And the Allens, all of them except Bob, had at least 20 years in the service when he moved back. This is, my dad owned 2 cars back then, even during the Depression. He was lucky. My dad was lucky, he had a job that there was all the other people around were living on grapefruit 4 meals a day and everything else. But we were very fortunate. My father was employed all the time, and he worked his way from office boy up to treasurer of Columbia Tools. And the Allen family, Grover, we call them Gobels, by the way. Everybody in Crete used to have a nickname. Everybody in Crete was got the list of all of them. The Adamses were Little Sparky or Little Goof or Big Goof, and Joe Laurie, Skinny.
Right.
I don't know what else I can talk about. Because you would hit on most of it. But I wish you people would come up and if you want to take a look at our family tree. It's very interesting. And we're all related, aren't we, cousins?
Let me expand that cousin bit. I almost addressed all of you as cousins. Several weeks ago, or a couple months ago, I don't remember how long before, I read a piece in the paper that stated that everyone who has East or Western European background is descended from Charlemagne, which of course makes us all cousins. Charlemagne had, I think, more than one wife, 2 or 3 or more perhaps, and a number of liaisons with other women, and left a lot of children from situations where there wasn't marriage.
We had a little space in Crete here up until about 50 years ago, where it was the best arrowhead collecting grounds around here anywhere. Evidently, they must have had a camp near where the Adams Cemetery was, and in that area around where we lived. And we used to find them in the garden. We used to find them in the garden. In fact, Grandpa Helm had the little house to this north of the Hotown house, and every year when you want to run this plow through there, the thing would jump in a certain spot. Well, he finally got wise and went down there with a shovel, and they got up this big round rock about yay big and that high, sitting over the Crete parking lot. They dug a hole down in the ground all around it, and they finally got it scooted on some skids, and they pulled it with about 20 horses down the road. But this is my pride and joy. That's a black or blue granite battle axe head, and this was found along with this. It's a hide scraper, evidently made here, because we find all kinds of chips made of the same kind of flint. You know how they get those little grooves in them? They heat this up so it's red hot, and then they take a drop of cold water in there, and then just that drop will make that rock slip right off. And this was found when they were digging the basement for the big antique shop down here on the north side of the street. Yes, that was a Dodge home at one time, and this came out of the basement of that house. And we have most of the Dodges in town buried in our cemetery.
Yeah. I got some of the Adams in my home. I'm very familiar with all those people. I owe that cemetery. We ran out of money, so I took over the job.
I have somewhere, one of our 5 generations on my mother's side. We had 5 generations. This is the 4 generations with my great-grandfather, William C. Adams, my grandfather, Byron Adams, my father, Leslie Adams, and my brother, who was only about a year and a half old there, Ralph Adams. This picture was taken in 1913. This one over here is me, my son, that's Myron, and Rick, and my father. Another one. I don't know what happened to the other one. But I'm the newest, we have the newest one in our family now. Because 2.5 weeks ago, I'm a great-grandma. You're doing all right, sir. See if I can find a picture here. This is a picture of the 4 generations. It didn't turn out very, very good. That's it, I guess. I enjoyed talking with you. Next time I'll bring my notes.
Next time when you bring your notes, then we'll have a whole night on Bessie Adams, right? We can go on and on and on.
When we were in Hawaii, Ralph told us he was a courier for the government after he was retired from the submarine corps.
Yes, it was.
He told us that. He took us all around Hawaii when we were there.
One thing, Ralph, and being in the submarine service, he had a very, very special need mission one time, and it's hard to conceive what a person had to go through to do this. Ralph was a linguist in Oriental dialects. He taught at the submarine base in Groton, Connecticut. He taught Oriental dialects. They took him and 3 other electronics experts up to the Bering Straits. This was during the Korean War, and they walked all the way down that whole coast, down over the 38th parallel into Korea. One of them didn't make it. 3 of them made it. And what they did there was they were taking tabs on all the electronic installations along the coast. Because that's the only way they could do it, is by sending people in to look for these things. Ralph, oh, by the way, forgot one more thing. My sister.
Last thing, because we have to get on to another thing.
All right, okay, this is it. My sister Fern's son, David, who was born right across the street over here, was one of the most highly decorated people in the Vietnam War. He served 13 tours of duty over there. His top medal was a Medal of Honor for Vietnam, and the next one was he was in the Order of the Elephant. And I never knew or heard of such a medal as being Order of the Elephant. And we were at Eisenhower's burial place and his museum and everything. Abilene, if you ever want to go to someplace interesting, you want to go there. They have all of his medals displayed. And here's that Order of the Elephant. It's a gorgeous medal. And this is given by the country of Denmark. They have 5 of them. And only 5 people in all the militaries can wear this at one time. And the only time somebody else is going to get to wear one is if one of those that dies. And then they have to turn in the medals back, and they get a facsimile of what were simulated. Beautiful. It's a beautiful medal right there. But all the medals that they get to keep are facsimile.
Very interesting what you did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're very fortunate to have the people who are very knowledgeable, some more Trebolds, about the Trebold family, Carol and Waylon. Are you going to participate? All right, Carol, we'll have Carol, and you can correct her, right? Okay, Carol.
He's older than I, he should be doing this.
I truly feel like a newcomer to this book because my history doesn't go back as far as we've been hearing tonight. Mine is on the Crete family, and it is not, does not go as far back as some of the other sections of my family. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. Many moons passed, and on April 4th, 1864, a son was born to Heinrich Christoph Conrad Treble and Elsa Maria Dreyer. Born was Conrad Heinrich Christoph Treble in Mesmerode, Hanover, Germany, my grandfather. His father was a farmer in Mesmerode. He lived in number 6 house. And my grandfather, he received his schooling in a neighboring town about 2 miles from his birthplace called Eidense, and was also confirmed at the Eidense Church. Grandpa's parents died when he was a youth. He lived with a Conrad Ohlendorf in Mesmerode, and he was an apprentice to a tailor. In 1882, 2 young men from Crete went to Germany, to the land of their forefathers. Friedrich Archenberg was 27, and Heinrich W. Ohlendorf was 25. And they were cousins. H.W. Ohlendorf was the grandfather of Lois Crowley, who many of you probably know. As the story goes, Fred Archenberg had a girlfriend who his mother didn't want him to marry. So Mama intercepted a lot of her letters and sent Fred off to Germany to try to forget her. And sent H.W. Ohlendorf, I don't know if he was supposed to be a chaperone or what, but at least the 2 of them went to Germany. They visited this Conrad Ohlendorf, the owner of a Bierstube, or a beer parlor in Germany. And it was some relation of H.W. who went to Germany. He met my grandfather, Henry Treble, at the Bierstube and found that he wanted to leave Germany, but he had no money. He was also of draft age and had not served his country. He was 18 years old, so was not allowed to leave Germany. Lois Crowley has a diary that her father kept when they went to Germany, and in there's a statement that said they had connived all night to see how they could get Grandpa out of Germany. Well, when they sailed back to from Germany to America, Grandpa was a stowaway on the boat until they were out to sea. They arrived in America in September 1st, 1882, having left Germany August 13th. According to the diary that Lois has, her grandfather, H.W. Ohlendorf, had paid, not H.W., but I suppose it was Fred Archenberg, had paid $11 on board for Grandpa, so they finally had to pay something for his trip to America. The diary also states that Fred had paid $280 for the trip and H.W. had paid $4 toward the trip. They also had paid on the bank in Bremen $200 for Fred, and H.W. had paid $100 to draw on. This was for any expenses that they had while staying in Germany. That was a total of $600 for the trip for the 2 of them. In America, Grandpa boarded and worked for Heinrich Behrens in the southeast part of Crete Township. Mrs. Behrens was an Ohlendorf, an aunt to H.W. Ohlendorf. He had also worked for the Battermans and the Seasons family. Grandpa Henry Treble was married April 6, 1889 to Amelia Treble, who was born December 4, 1865 on Goodnow Road, east of Route 1. They were married at Eagle Lake Church, Beecher, Illinois. She was the daughter of John Heinrich Ohlendorf and his wife Wilhelmina nee Archenberg. The Ohlendorfs immigrated June 8, 1852. This is where my family comes a little bit earlier to this country. They came on ship Rastade from Eidensen, Germany. The Arkenbergs immigrated June 3, 1853 from Bremen, Germany to New York on ship Ella. They lived in Kohlenfeld, Germany. Amelia Treble, Grandpa's wife, was the sister to H.W., who brought Grandpa to America. My poor grandfather couldn't get away from the Oldendorf family. I mean, he lived with Oldendorfs in Germany. He came to America with H.W. He lived with the Barons, who was Oldendorf, and then he married Amelia. After their marriage, Grandpa and Grandma made their home on the farm on which we live on Exchange Street. It's a century farm. Grandma inherited the homestead through her father's will at his death in 1889. H.W. lived on the farm prior to my grandparents. The farm had been in the Oldendorf side of the family since 1883 and on the Treble side from 1889. Now, my grandfather did not put his name on the farm at the beginning, as he did not want it said that he had married for land or for money. The original land was on the south side of Exchange Street, but as land became available on the north side of the road, Grandpa added to the farm. In later years, my dad added to the farm, and we too have also added to it. The land on the north side of the road originally belonged to the Safford family. That was another old-time name from Crete. One of the Saffords, A.P.K., went west in the gold rush to California, which we've all heard about tonight, and later became the governor of Arizona. Now, my grandpa and grandma had 6 children. The first child was stillborn. My grandparents were dairy farmers, and their first milk went to Chicago by train. About 1808, 1809, the people of Crete asked Grandpa if he would start a milk route in Crete. There was a man by the name of Henry Lukey who had tried the route a few years earlier, but too many families still had their own cows. Every person had their own cow. They would take them down Main Street to the woods pastures on the north end of town here to graze for the daytime, and then they would bring them back home. My dad was confirmed in the spring of 1908 and went to Dolton to work with a truck farmer by the name of Mr. Engel. That fall, he started the milk route in Crete with a horse and wagon. With a half a can of milk and a dipper, he started the route, dipping milk with a quart dipper into any container the people would bring out. In a later time of the milk route, they also sold it in bottles. My dad peddled milk for 7.5 years. The route continued with Uncle Carl and Uncle Art on the route another 7.5 years for a total of 15 years. My dad has told the story of leaving his horse and wagon in town after the milk route to have the horse have shoes put on. I believe it was Mr. Opperman's building. He would leave the horse and wagon there, and then...
He'd take the horse and wagon home and then walk the horse back to town.
At least when they had the horse shoot, they would take him, head him down the road in the right direction, and the horse would come home on its own. It took a while. He was grazing on the way home, but he always came home. He knew his route. About 1923-24, the route was sold to Dixie Dairy, and Uncle Carl remained delivering milk for Dixie until the 1950s. When Dixie took over, it was no longer raw milk, but pasteurized. My grandfather bought a farm on Burble Road, I think it was about 1913, and he put his oldest son, Uncle Bill, on the farm. My dad, after he got done with the milk route, farmed with my grandpa, as did Uncle Art. And my Uncle Art bought a farm on the Faithorn Road just south of our farm and moved on to that farm, but he only was on the farm 1 year when he died of a massive heart attack at the age of 40. Grandma died 11 days later. My dad had one sister who married and farmed with her husband near Moni. Grandpa went back to Germany in 1908 to see his brother and was planning another trip in 1928, but died before he could take the trip. Now, our grandfather also had a younger brother by 2 years who came to America and lived here for 5 years. This was circa about 1892 to 1897. William lived with the Walkerly family on the southwest corner of the State Line Road and Exchange Street. He went back to Germany. He married Wilhelmina Ackerman there, who he apparently knew before. I have an idea that is why he maybe went back. But she would not come to America as she had a sickly sister and no one to care for her, as the parents and brother had already passed away. So they remained in Germany and raised their family there. They had 7 children. 1 died at 6 weeks. When my grandfather went to Germany in 1908, he tried talking the oldest girl, Minnie, into coming to America. And I guess she had an idea she wanted to, but she did not do it until she was 13 years old and had been confirmed. That's when she and her brother, Heinrich, came to America. It was not the oldest boy, it was the second oldest boy. The oldest boy had a chance at the farm, so he would not leave Germany. But the second boy came with her. And they, of course, were sponsored by Grandpa. Grandpa's brother, Wilhelm, died in 1918 and his wife in 1920. The 4 remaining children in Germany lived with families in Windsor, Germany, namely the local baker, the mayor. The oldest boy was hired out as a farmer, and as soon as arrangements could be made by Grandpa, these children were also brought to America. They came in 1921. Aunt Minnie always, well, we call her Aunt Minnie, was actually my dad's cousin, but we called her Aunt because she was older. My folks didn't believe in calling by first name. When they came, Aunt Minnie told the story that their ship had got an SOS from another ship that was in trouble. So they had to go with their ship to pick up passengers from the ship that was having problems. That way their trip took much longer coming to America than would normally have to be. When the children came, those that were old enough, they worked for area families in Crete and Beecher. The others attended school. All had to attend school till age 16. Now, Aunt Minnie was 13 and, well, probably 14 by the time she got here. And she had to go for school for 2 years in America. The first year she completed grades 1, 2, and 3. She skipped grade 4 and then completed grades 5 and 6 in her second year. And this schooling included learning English.
Okay, good. Let's finish.
And Lily learned to speak English very well.
First of all, we thank all of you because it's, your family history is so much of Crete history. And your families have made Crete the nice place it is. And for newcomers like myself, I'm a real newcomer. I've only been here 18 years now, so a real newcomer. And have made Crete such a nice place to live and to raise a family. Are there any questions that the rest of you have for these people? We'll take a few questions, yeah.
I have a comment. Some years back, we had a friend of ours give us a Wisconsin newspaper, and there was a advertisement in there for an international dealer, Treble Implement, and we contacted the family, and it turned out that David Treble, the one we contacted, his grandfather's name was Henry. Our grandfather's name was Henry. They both came to America. They both died within. Oh wait a minute, no. They both had a son, Fred. My father's name was Fred, and one of his sons was Fred. They had They both died within 3 days of each other at age 80. They both started a milk rally in their own town. And it just got to be spooky. Well, the first time that Dave come out here, he wanted to check up on the family, and he thought that the same thing we had been thinking, that maybe Grandpa had been fooling around.
Any other good comments like that? Everett?
I've got a couple of recollections of the Gaines farm. I lived just 2 blocks south of there, and as a young boy, Mr. Henricks, Bill Henricks, lived in the house at what was an antique place just east of the Adams Cemetery. It originally was a Dodge house, and there was an antique place just recently. And Mr. Henricks lived in that house, and he worked the Gaines farm. And as a young kid, I palled around with their son Gilbert. He was a couple of years older than I was. But we used to take lunches out to the people out in the field when they were doing either thrashing or doing hay or something like that. Mrs. Henricks would make a big wicker basket full of sandwiches, one for each of us, and we would carry them out to the field, and the men would have their lunch out there. Twice a day we would take them out, in the morning and the afternoon again. And that was quite an experience to remember. Another thing sticks in my mind a little bit. The Gaineses had a real neat orchard to the west side of their house. And most of the people around Crete maybe had an apple tree or a cherry tree or something, but they had a good variety of everything. And one thing I remember, well, like on the southwest side of where the fence was, they had 2 black cherry trees in there. And I don't think they ever harvested a single cherry. Those kids just raided that thing, climbed up and got everything. They had peaches in there, they had plums, and in the fall, up would be to the back of the house, there was a vineyard in there, and we did a pretty good job on the vineyard. One other thing I remember, we used to spend a lot of time out in the barn and around like that, and a bunch of us used to go into the barn, and there were 2 levels of a haymow, and we used to jump from the upper haymow down to the lower one. That was quite a fun thing to do. One day we did it, and somebody had left a pitchfork kind of up turn, and Henry Cale jumped down, and he ran the pitchfork completely through his foot. And but it didn't bleed very badly, and we had a couple of older boys with us, and they said, well, just go down to the horse trough and wash it off. And they washed it off. And then one of the other guys says, you know what's good for that is to get some cow manure and put that on. So we got some cow manure and tied an old handkerchief, red handkerchief around it. Next day he was walking around like nothing happened. Either lived or died. Well, they also had in the orchard, there was an abandoned little pig barn back there, a little shed. And as kids, maybe Jimmy remembers, maybe he was a little younger than us, we used to use that for our clubhouse. And that's where we got initiated in the smoking cigarettes. We'd put a couple of pennies each, and somebody older would go uptown and buy a bag of Bull Durham or Golden Grain, and we would, smoke a cigarette. We didn't have the money. In the fall, we'd get the cigars from the catalpa trees that dried off and we would light those and smoke. Okay.
Juanita?
I wanted to tell Carol, you spoke of your grandfather being married in the Eagle Lake Church. Well, I didn't come here until 1946, but my home out in the country is the Eagle Lake Schoolhouse, which we moved and remodeled.
Anyone else?
One thing,
Yes, Jim?
I forgot one very important thing that's in my life. My oldest son, Mark, was the chief navigator of the Viking rockets that went to Mars. He's had a very elaborate career. He's moving back to Crete next week.
Oh,
Yep.
wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and being part of it. Thank you for the Trebolds, the Gaines, the Hughes, the Adams, and the speakers of those families tonight. We really appreciate it. I think it's been a great success, and I hope we can do this again another time. Also, this is going to be on videotape, so if anyone wants to borrow this for the Historical Society, they can do that. Mary Ann? Brett,
I
go
got
ahead.
one other comment. My wife and I just finished kind of an extensive trip up to Alaska and northern Canada and stuff, and we came back in through Montana, and we were in Anaconda, and somebody had told us to go west of town and to look at the lake out there. And while we were out there, we saw this sign to go up to a chapel. And we went up there, and here on this edge of this high overlook is this beautiful chapel. And it was in memory of the parents had erected in memory of their son who was killed in an automobile accident out in California. And we were able, the caretaker was there, and we were able to go into it. And we looked around, and there were several plaques in there. And these people had originated in Sterling, Illinois. But anyhow, the mother's name was Crete Dillon Bowman. Her first name was Crete. They had a daughter, and her name was also Crete, and used as a first name. Never had heard of it before. Never had seen it.
We had a woman write us a note. Her first name was Crete.
Is that right?
Where was she from, Carol? Do you remember? Washington.
Went out to dinner without me. Yeah, he in a hurry. We always went to every Thursday night. And she saw me yesterday. You see, I'm going to and I told you I was going to go. So she Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start our program tonight. I'm like talking to friends. I'm so happy to see such a large crowd here tonight to honor Anne, one of our sweet little citizens of the town. But before we go into that, we have a couple of items that we want to do before we start the program. And Phyllis, okay.
We're pleased tonight to honor two couples here in Crete for our first beautification award from the Historical Society. We started this about a year ago, and they had to have their applications in by last April, so it's taken us a little while to get this and get their certificate ready and framed, but we have the two couples tonight with us. And these are people who have taken older homes in Crete and restored them in a beautiful, loving way for to improve their home and to make us more proud of Crete. And they should be very proud of their homes. And I'd like the two couples to come up. It's Bob and Karen Kalenda and Sharon and Bob Comas. Come on up. First of all, we have Bob and Karen Kalenda, and they live at 1588 Main Street. And I'm going to send around a picture of their home, and there's one little picture of the way it used to look. This is a beautiful home on South Main Street, and it's just two houses north of Zion, Lutheran Church. And they've done some beautiful work on it. They've added a family room. They completely repainted the whole outside. And they have beautiful impatiens flowers out the front. So I'm sure you'll recognize the home. And I'll send around a picture of their home so you can kind of, whoops. I need to straighten it out. And I'd like to say a little bit more about the home. The home was built in 1917 on 1 acre of land. The house was painted white with black trim, but was badly in need of repainting. It had an enclosed, completely enclosed front.
Pool table in the dining room, the living room. And Anne always made everyone feel welcome, but you had to, as Marie said, you had to be a game player, because Anne loved to play games, cards, and 20 questions, and anything. And I got involved really with Anne through Family Counseling Agency. And she started, when we set up, in fact, I think they met at her house, didn't they, Paul, for a while? And before they had an office. And when they set up an office, Anne would be in charge with Alice Jane home of getting furniture and everything so the office could operate. And I think she did this about 3 times when we moved from one spot to another. But Anne was always willing to put herself wholeheartedly into any project that she undertook. And she made a lot of us feel shamed because she had so much energy and could work tirelessly for any cause. But Anne and I had long conversations about all kinds of things. Nuclear freeze is one of her pet projects too. When it was mentioned, she was active in that group. Theology for lunch was another group that she would call me and tell me what had gone on when she'd been in theology for lunch. But I miss Anne because we had good conversations and she always was interested in whatever I was doing too.
When you said before the, nuclear freeze, yeah, what was that? That one I have not come across.
I never went to one of their meetings, but she thought I was interested. She would always call me when we were ready to meet. But I think they met at Governor State.
Of course. I went to one meeting with her for this nuclear freeze group. I don't think it was active too long, and I didn't quite understand what they were talking about when I did go. But she was quite interested in, at least when I went, it was in Park Forest.
I remember that group. I believe it was called Safe Freeze, and it had to do with nuclear disarmament, and it was very good to her heart. And I think it still continues in some other form.
It's now known as South Suburban Peace Action. Formerly St. Freeze. And we are active and we meet at the library in Park Forest every 3rd Wednesday.
It's your plug-in.
I remember Anne very well, and I was very good friends with her, and she was always so generous. I'm a Methodist, and she used to always house all of our youth ministers that used to come from Garrett, that would come over the weekends, and they would stay with Anne, and she always would let us use her home for our youth ministers so they would have a place to stay. But the thing I think that I remember best about Anne is that I would go to visit her. Now, I don't know how much older she was than me, but she always helped me down the stairs. And she always came out to the car, and she always opened the door for me and made sure that I got in the car and was safe. Now, that's more than my husband does. And I never forgot it, and I just let her think I needed the help because she liked to do it. And she was a wonderful, giving person. My name is Betty Cosme. Used to be Martin. I think more people remember me as Betty Martin than Betty Cosme.
You want to start at the beginning, more or less, and then chronologically go up. But I remember Anne as a mother of some very good friends of mine. Anything you mentioned, I particularly remember they have
different days, like, when he was in the Doors days. And everybody had to go in and out through the window. And Grandma. I remember Grandma trying to climb through a window.
That wasn't one of the days I was.
I like to remember sleepovers or slumber parties at Tom Tom. We all sleep upstairs on the floor. I think there was any creature up there. Maybe there, as I recall, it was just a great big room. I know one time there was a snake loose up there. We were all a little bit leery of that. But it was always fun.
Why you bring it in?
I remember, and we were talking at Women's Club in those days about getting different classes together, and we decided Frank Wade said he would teach us how to wallpaper. So Ann said, well, I have a bedroom that could be wallpaper. So a group of us went out to wallpaper in her bedroom. We didn't know what we were doing, but we did wallpaper. And I also remember when I worked at the school, anytime I had a poor little teacher who didn't know where she was going to live, I would call Ann, and she always took them under her wing. Either found them in an apartment or else she took them to her home. She was a wonderful person.
My name is John Watts, and I'm from Frankfurt. And the reason I'm here is because I got acquainted with the family through Tom Tom. She was a roommate of my wife at Rockford College, which is the same college that Ann Milton went to. And of course, through my marriage and through meeting Tom, I always thought it was kind of a strange family because anybody that would have two brothers called Puz and Coke and a girl named Tom Tom, there had to be something unusual about all that. Even when I write letters today to my friends when I talk about Tom Tom, the people who do not know her, I always put in parentheses, Elizabeth. But it's been an enduring relationship, and I've been out to visit with Tom Tom on any number of occasions, and been in her home and stayed there in Evergreen. And it's just been a very nice situation. I also know Ann, because Ann happened to be a member of the Theology for Lunch Club, which met at the first at Governor's State, and then they moved over to a good church. That's my church, the Unitarian Universalist Church in Park Forest. And I always admired her and loved to hear her expound on religious topics, because in a word, if I had to define Ann Milton, I would say that she is a humanitarian type. She didn't, excuse me for saying it, but she didn't cotton much in the realm of metaphysics, and she was a very much down-to-earth person who wanted to do good for her fellow men and for her fellow women. Thank you.
Ann and my husband's mother, Marguerite Weeks, were cousins. And so I was kind of a third-tail relative, and I enjoyed Ann every time I saw her because she always had a joke to tell, or we played cards, or we did something, but Ann was always fun to be with. And there if you needed her. I love Ann. I still do.
Ann was quite a person, quite a volunteer, quite a someone who would work for you or help you out. Okay, we have any other?
I guess I really should say something too, on a personal basis. My husband was a nice person. Ann came to our home one day a week, and we can't remember how many years it was, between 10 and 15 years. She came very faithful and played scratch. As Mr. Levan's ability to pick up things deteriorated, she did that for him, and very then his vision began to fail, and he was getting a bit of a problem with that. So Anne compensated for that. Then he could no longer manage it, she could see it. So she started reciting poetry to him, and she found out he was delighted with that. So we had poetry sessions, and she'd bring her books after she ran out of those she knew by memory, and would read to him for an hour. Now that's a lot of work. I've read for an hour. And she did this consistently, and she felt as though she had to report in case she couldn't be there. She was so strict about keeping that appointment. And she was so sensitive to his needs that really, I have never met such a highly sensitive human in my life. And I knew her a long time. I worked with that, well, baby clinic in the upstairs bedroom. So, you know, it's been a while. I've been around too. And we learned to love her. And he was very, very strict when she passed away. Because she came when she shouldn't have come in. Just to be keeping her. So I thought I should tell that because that was nothing, it was something the public didn't know about. It was never recognized. But that was a long-term commitment.
And you said you started with her in the Well Baby.
My name is Patricia LeBron. My husband's name is Stanley LeBron. We live on Jefferson Street, and he's been ill since 1968. So she was always aware of it.
And you started with the Well Baby clinic with her.
Well, I was a
you did work with her.
temporary person. When she needed someone, she called me. I wasn't on the
No, okay.
I could only really get helpers. But I do remember that very well.
They say that she did all the laundry, all the
yeah.
diapers.
Yes, yes.
No Pampers, it was all diapers.
And she did that all.
And no bills.
I know when my granddaughter came with her fiance, and I didn't put them up in a motel. She took the young man, and another friend of mine took the girl. And I said, well, Ann, I'll come up and fix the linen for her. Oh, no, no, no. And it was in 1986, so you know, she wasn't young, yeah. And she was doing all that. Thank you for listening to the personal highlights.
Thank you for your input. Do you have any other?
My name is Paul Slope, and you may know me as a person from the United Way. Ann started the Combined Appeal, and I don't recall who it was in the middle 1960s asked me to come to one of their meetings, and I did. And unbeknown to me, I didn't know that her husband had been in Formosa. I had spent some time in Formosa working for the United Nations, so we had sort of an affinity right there. And as time went on, she persuaded me to act as the chairman of her family counseling steering committee. That began in the late 1960s. She always felt that a man should be at the head of something. I don't know. She was a feminist, but she wasn't averse to men. And I always appreciated her devotion to humanity. She didn't like a lot of red tape. As United Way became more sophisticated, and she no longer had income. And one of the reasons that I stayed with United Way had to do with the fact that initially the Family Council Agency had no financial support. The only support that it received from the area of Crete was little skits put on, primarily under the direction of Liddell here. And we'd raise anywhere from $500 to $1,000, maybe $1,200, and we'd give that to Family Council that maintained it. But as time went on, it became more difficult to do this sort of thing. And we joined the United Way of suburban Chicago, and for the first time I could see that there was a way to get money for family counselors since we're going to fund more than just one agency. So we began to fund family counseling, and we still do to this day. So we've been fulfilling her dreams because she was always vitally interested in family counseling. even up to the time that she died.
She was also a babysitter. We had family counseling in the library, and if anybody had an extra kid or two while they needed their counseling, Anne would play dominoes and all kinds of stuff with them. She loved those games. And even when the women's club offered to supplant her time, she was right there day and night. I mean, she was busy. And I remember way back when the Methodist people were going to start this daily vacation Bible school. And they asked if I would be the leader of it. And I said, well, I have one extra kid at home. One of them goes to first grade, that was Gibby, and then Bruce I have. And I said, I can't really take you up there. And she said, well, they would babysit for Bruce. And Grandma was always sitting there. And she took care of Grandma for a long, long time. And so she had that too. And so Bruce, he was 3 years old or whatever he was. He was talking and interested in everything. And he would play in that room with Grandma and Anne. And I can remember Grandma just loved Bruce because he said, do you have any legs under that shawl? I did always keep them covered, and she was so tickled, and she would, on. But for all the weeks that thing was going on in the Methodist Church, I would take him over there, and it was just fine with them and fine with him. And she was a near neighbor, so I saw quite a lot of her. But I remember anything that had to do with extra kids. She would go, I'll play with them, I'll do this, I'll do that. And everybody does like to do that.
You mentioned your mother.
Yes, Grandma Rose.
Right, and the last years she spent a lot of time reading to them. Literature, anything of the day. I think she really, they really talked about issues and things of the day, of literature.
She was a brainy lady. Anything you would talk about, she knew more about it than you did. Yes, she did.
The cemetery.
Yeah. She's your sister. Her father and someone else. There were 3 or 4 gentlemen. So we started in the cemetery. And she and her sister owned it after Mr. Rowley died. And we met Anne, George was our attorney, right after Mr. Rowley died, we bought the cemetery. But Anne was really the one that after Mr. Rowley died, went out and talked to people, and she was one of the writing stories about it for years, and she was very helpful to me about straightening out records and answering questions. Whenever I needed to call in, she was always there to answer. But the cemetery was important because that was a part of the private history, and she really was very concerned about keeping it going.
Well, Grandma lived so long, Tommy always used to say it was if Grandma died.
Having lived with her so long, having moved in with her after encampment overseas, I'm sure that got to be kind of a long, she was 96 when she died. Yes. What year did she die?
Whenever I do my secretarial work, I always go back to Anne, because it was at one of the Crete Combined Appeal meetings way back with Paul talking about that for some reason the secretary wasn't there, and so Anne asked me to take minutes, and I said, well, what do you do? She told me just write down what they say. So I did what I was supposed to do, and I guess I did a pretty good job on because I had more secretarial jobs and everything. But, we always enjoyed going there, visiting with her, sitting around that dining room table. And Paul is still going strong with them today.
Were other people aware of her long association with this place in Palis Park? Wasn't it? She served on the board for so long. And I don't know quite how to describe what this organization was, but I believe she was very interested in the kind of counseling they did there. And she would go there day and night to help wherever she could. And I went to a retreat there with her, which impressed me very much. And also went to some activities they had there. It was a lovely place. And she was very much taken up with the work there. Spent a lot of time at that.
That was the Community Center Foundation.
That's right, Community Center.
My husband was out there with her at that time. He was well at that period. And our son went to camp there. And really, they were counseling alcoholics, basically. Because I remember our son coming home from farm camp and saying, "Oh, when you find a bottle in the straw, you turn it in because these men have a problem." So that's how I knew what they were counseling for.
As a child, I never knew just what Ann Milton was about, but she made a large impression on me, and I admired her, and I knew she was up to a lot of good. And like Hans Clausen left an impression, and so did Ann Milton. And her son, Cope, did he play drums in the band yet? I remember him playing drums, I played chess, but he always affected me like he was in the military. I stayed out of his way. And I just figured out, well, his father was, in the military, it probably rubbed off on him.
Well, and the first time I met Ann was playing tennis with her at the tennis courts at, they had tennis courts at the high school, when the high school was at the elementary school on Elizabeth Street. Anyway, there were tennis courts over in that area for quite a while. And we would go there and play tennis, so she's out doing that in our younger days.
This is sort of personal, but and the end of Anne's life had some real tragedy for her. I was really close to her, and I talked to her a lot and so on. After her mother had died, and after her husband had retired, she had never been able to live with him, you see. And she had always been hopeful that he would be a college professor, and he was trained to be that. And I think she was reading to be a factory wife all her life. I think she was really, that's how she operated. At any rate, he got a part-time job in someplace, Southern Illinois. Where was that? He got a part-time job, but it was going to be if she would be with him, because he had had a heart attack at that time, which was unexpected, and she could be down there. And so at that time, she was preparing to leave Crete and go down there and be the faculty wife. And then he died. And then Anne was devastated. I mean, her grandma was gone, her husband was gone, her kids are gone, and her goal for life was shot. I mean, she never knew that. And so she applied for the Peace Corps, and that was, I don't know what age that was, but she said, The only thing I can't do, I have this, what was it, the
Scleroderma.
Say that. And that, she said, I cannot stand the cold. I cannot stand, I couldn't go up to a last one. Anything else, and I would love to do that. And I remember at that time, the women's club wanted her to be the president of the women's club. Well, no, she better not, because maybe she's going to preschool. And lots of jobs like that were being offered to her. Family counseling, she was very important in family counseling. And, but she was refusing these things, thinking, but she didn't hear from them, And it must have been a year and a half before she finally heard from them, and they refused her because of this disease. And she said, they knew it. That's one thing I said, I can't stand. I can't stand the cold. And because of that, you are not eligible. And so she felt rejected. And there were several in family counseling when she felt rejected, but she was working so hard and trying to get the women's club to do the thing. They were willing, but she was driving herself. You know what I mean? Grandma's gone, so she was this kind of, she drove that little car like a bat out of hell. And you can see how she was driven. But anyhow, then that was another rejection. And my heart just bled for her when that happened, because she was ready to leave this town and, do the whole thing, and they refused her.
How old do you think she was at that time?
It was about 1961 or 62, because I had just met her. And here I was with a new baby, and I thought I was exhausted. And I was looking at her as old. It's all perspective, isn't it? And here she was volunteering for the Peace Corps, and I was just so impressed to think that she would do that. She must have been
do that. And she was looking forward to it, but then she was rejected, and it was the rejection that kicked her pride and everything. I mean, that hurt her. It really, really hurt her. And so she dove into Crete again, just with a vengeance.
Tense.
Yeah, tense. And then she'd go and visit her kids, and one time at Christmas time she visited Tomtown, and while she went, the house burned, all that fire. She came back and years was this. But she always picked up again, and I think then she leased that house to a real estate company or something like that to take care of them so that she could still live there. And she taught boodles of people to read English, to anybody that would love her, but come on, I'll teach you. So that's how I knew her. And she had a lot of hurt, and she had a kind of chip on her shoulder about being rejected for, we found that in family counseling. If there was another job, and well, I'll take that, well, why don't you have somebody else do it? You're good enough. Oh, I'm not good enough. And she was, so she wasn't a wimp in any way. She's so real good, but she's feisty.
Well, I think she sold the house to a couple with the understanding that she could stay there.
Yes.
I should say that was us, Mary Ann McLean. And that we had a most lovely association with Ann through our whole time together and through the period after the fire where we worked together on restoring the house. And our friendship with Ann has always been just one of the highlights.
She made friends with everybody that lived in her house. Everybody that came was a friend.
She did have a real genius for friendship.
Redoing the house after the fire, I guess, was quite a project for her too, wasn't it?
It certainly was, but she really threw herself into it.
I mean, everything had been special made and to match all the woodwork and...
Oh, yes, and trying to get some of that woodwork rematched was in fact no longer possible for the kind of workmanship that was done at the time. Oh, and the basketball game, I had one more input for that. because the chandelier always showed the stars that way. And there was one bulb globe that did not match the others.
Talking about her being with friends, when she go visit her children, she would love to go on the bus. And I take her many times to the bus station in Chicago Heights because she loves to go to Colorado or because she liked to sit and meet people on the bus and play cards. So that was her, she loved to travel that way, to meet people. Airline you get on in a couple hours you're there, but a bus you get to meet people. And then I think that epitomizes Anne's personality. She loved to play.
And that road travel went on until they had a drug problem on a bus. They came in with the dogs to do the sniffing and so forth, and she unfortunately told her children about it. And that was the end of the bus travel. She went by plane after that. But she relayed all these stories to my husband, you know, and he had the biggest kick out of listening to her. It was life on the outside to him. But those dogs, I couldn't imagine her sitting there with these dogs sniffing around.
Mom was the one that called the fire department when the house was burning. We came home from church from Christmas Eve service, and she said, "I smell smoke." We ran all over her house trying to see what was on fire, you know, and it wasn't. We stood out, and it was quite strong, you know, and we called. I don't think at the time you really knew, did you?
No, but he had your car and brought me home. And your husband and the kids went on in their car. And I said, oh, I gotta call somebody because something's burning. And I know I called you, Zig, and told you about it. And we called somebody else, and pretty soon one of the big things from Park Forest came. And they, I don't remember how we got in there. Oh, a Methodist church assistant minister was staying here at the time. He was still over at church because we had gotten out after the service. And anyway, they ran and got him, and he got in there, and it was quite a bad fire. But I was so scared. That was awful. I knew it was close. You could smell it and everything. Nobody in the neighborhood. See, I was across the street for 42 years from her.
In the park building out the Believer next for Christmas Eve after our church service. And I remember all our children hanging out the windows, and then some of the firemen did come in and we served coffee, and it was a horrible Christmas Eve.
And she was out in California or someplace, and was visiting Town for Christmas, so she wasn't there.
It was all, that evening was a real tribute to the Crete Fire Department. 28 firemen left their Christmas Eve celebrations to put out the fire.
Yeah, they were there a while. She was really a good neighbor. I knew her from the time I was 11. And I remember her walking down the street with me. I was going to my grandma's on the west side. And she had been over there, and her grandma's visiting a friend. And so we walked together, and she was so friendly to a kid in 11. I thought how nice she is. And she was in college. And she told me that she was in college.
Helped to learn English and learn our customs, and she also, if needed to be, took them to Chicago to get their citizenship papers. And if she didn't know the language, I understand she went out and bought a dictionary and started teaching.
With Noah Walt, he's a fun-loving guy. Spent a lot of time over at the Milton House. And he tells the story, and I don't know the dog's name, but they played with the dog, and across into the living room part there was grapes drawn across there. And it would be in the dining room, whatever that adjacent room was, and they threw a ball into this room,
hold the dog and then release, and the dog will run in there and get the ball. And they do that a few times, and the dog will bring the ball back. Well, there was also sliding doors across there. These kids they put close the sliding doors with the bridge drawn in front of the ball. He'd tell that story if he were here.
To her wedding, which was at the West Point Academy. And when they left there, well, maybe I should tell that story first. Tom was telling me, I'd been in touch with her, and she said, I said that Ann and Cap had been they're married at West Point. She says, yes. She says, let me tell you about that wedding. She says it was the coldest day of the year. The flowers didn't arrive, and the organ froze up. So I guess that was a good start.
We want to remodel the the way I remember. I knew the day.